All right, good afternoon, everybody. So welcome to the next version of Tropical Storm Francine. And let's get started with what's new. Francine is now strengthening and has reformed a bit farther northwest. We thought that might happen earlier today because it didn't have its act together very well, and now it does. And that means that our forecast should become much more streamlined in terms of what it's going to do in terms of strengthening and where it's going to go. So regarding strengthening, the cyclone will be a hurricane east of South Padre Island on Tuesday, but the good news is it will be moving away from our coastline by then. Because of this jog to the northwest and reformation today, we've extended the tropical storm watch into coastal Kennedy County that now includes the Padre Island National Seashore and Laguna Madre, and from here on we'll call that the Pins area of Kennedy County. So what's going on with the overview? Tropical storm watches remain in effect for coastal and island portions of Cameron and Willacy County. As I mentioned above, we extended them to the Kennedy coast. The timing of most impacts will continue through Tuesday sunset. Because the situation has moved a bit farther north faster, we think this will also end faster. So our time frame has shrunk a little bit now into mainly Tuesday rather than Tuesday night. Rainfall and wind will end quickly thereafter, and tides and surf will subside more gradually, especially on Wednesday. So here's our main focus. We're still looking at eastern Cameron and southeastern Willacy County. The impacts include potential flooding of low-lying areas and poor drainage locations through Tuesday. The greatest flooding potential will occur across Cameron and Willacy east of the expressway and Kennedy right near the coast. The flood watch remains in effect for all of these areas. Now, if you've noticed today, not shown on the graphics here, we've had almost 3 inches in the city of Brownsville east side, meaning the airport. Other places had 1 to 2 inches in the east side of Brownsville, and it's saturated now. And we think these areas will be at most risk for flooding, especially overnight and into Tuesday. There has been a lot less rainfall the farther west you go, and that will continue to be the story as we brief on here. As far as the other impacts, we're looking at coastal impacts with seawater covering the Barrier Island beaches through Tuesday night, with water into the dunes at high tides late tonight through early Tuesday, and again late Tuesday through early Wednesday morning. We're looking at an 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. time frame tonight and a 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. time frame Wednesday, though Wednesday could see some receding of the water as the system moves quickly to the northeast. Now, water depths will be up to 1.5 to 2.5 feet above normally dry ground at that time. So if you remember Alberto, we actually got up to 2.8 feet above normally dry ground. And if you remember Beryl, we were closer to 1.5 feet. So somewhere in between Beryl and Alberto is what we're looking at, especially tonight, probably into Tuesday night's high tide as well. The above normal tides may also impact unprotected docks and roads on Laguna Madre, meaning in Port Isabel and Port Mansfield. Tropical storm force winds, mostly in gusts, are most likely along South Padre Island from Port Mansfield to Boca Chica, and potentially into Port Isabel, Bayview, and the Port of Brownsville, Rio Hondo, and even Los Fresnos east side. Gusts there could reach 40 to 50 miles per hour in stronger bands or squalls through Tuesday sunset. Dangerous surf, rough, high Gulf waves, and up to 60-mile-per-hour winds are becoming more likely over the Gulf, especially south of Port Mansfield and out 20 to 60 nautical miles. This will definitely impact shipping. We all know that small craft should be in port, but shippers should stay out of this water as well, especially with a hurricane underway at that time. So let's go to the impacts real quick. Most of them, again, are on the east side of the valley. So we're talking lower valley and the southeast part of the lower valley, if you will. So for wind, minor damage to unfastened lightweight objects, we may see isolated scattered power outages. Those locations would be the Barrier Islands, especially South Padre, but also Bayside communities such as Port Isabel and Bayview in Cameron County. And that would be tonight through Tuesday sunset, with the peak being tonight through the mid-afternoon or early afternoon on Tuesday. For storm surge and inundation, we mentioned 1 to 2, maybe 3 feet of higher than normal tides. With that, we'd have damage possible to unfastened objects or loose docks, especially on unprotected waters, unprotected coastlines. The Barrier Island is most concerning. We'll see some beach erosion as well. Again, not as much as Alberto, but definitely more than Beryl. So look for that kind of in-between situation. And for those of you who can be out there safely and provide some pictures during that time, especially at high tide, tonight, but really early tomorrow morning may be best to get those photos. Be safe in doing so. We'd love to have that imagery. We're looking at through pre-dawn Wednesday, especially at high tide each period, as we mentioned before. Flooding rain could produce up to 3 feet of water depth in poor drainage location, mainly Cameron along and east of the expressway and Willacy east of the expressway. So Raymondville and Lightford, you're probably off the hook. Sebastian as well. Harlingen too, but Brownsville, San Benito, and points east of there, you're not off the hook. You have to be careful out there. And this threat will continue through Tuesday afternoon. Right now, the most concerning area would really be the northeast side of Brownsville down through the airport and points east of there, where we've had some of the heaviest rain so far and a lot of ponding of water and saturation of the ground. So another 3 to 5 inches would go quickly into floodwater versus just absorption. As far as tornadoes go, we're thinking mainly in the Gulf in form of waterspouts. Over the waters, as we say in the location, immediate coast may be in Cameron County. We have to be concerned later tonight into tomorrow morning, and then ending quickly by afternoon. The marine, we've already gone over that. It's dangerous. High seas and strong winds could capsize small craft. The lower Texas Gulf waters of Laguna Madre through Tuesday night. Needless to say, with all that going on, it's very dangerous surf and very high intensity rip currents. So we can show that quickly on this chart. We're looking at elevated threat for wind, mainly Cameron East and Willacy Coast. Same deal for surge. Same deal for flooding rain, mainly along and east of I-69E, especially Cameron County, which is jackpot for rainfall. We don't need much more at this point. We've done well lately, but we're going to get a little too much in some areas. No river flooding concerns, but marine is our big concern, a significant threat, given the fact that it will be a hurricane as it crosses those waters in the east portion of the locations from 20 to 60 nautical miles out south of Port Mansfield. So here's a situation overview of the storm now. It is a high-end tropical storm, 65-mile-per-hour winds and a small core around the center, but the tropical storm winds extend up to 140 miles on the west side, which means not too far from our coastline, and those bands we'll show you on radar are not that far away, so they could touch the coast later this evening for the overnight. Francine will track north through Tuesday morning and then shift quickly to the northeast, exiting stage right, if you will. Then landfall expected towards the upper Texas, more likely Louisiana coast by late Wednesday. Tropical storm watches remain in effect for the coastal island portions of Cameron and Willacy, but now have been expanded to coastal island Kennedy due to that slight westward jog that we mentioned before. And there's that slight westward jog. You can see on this blue highlighted area, you can now see the center really developing quickly as we expect it to become a hurricane either this evening or certainly overnight while moving within 120 miles. So as it moves to the east of South Potter, it will be around 80 miles east of the island Tuesday. At that point, though, it will be a strong Category 1 heading into Category 2 territory, but at least the center should be fairly tight. So the tropical storm force winds are what we're concerned about on the island, but not much farther inland, as we'll show you momentarily. So here's our radar. You can see some of these outer banded areas that have already produced rainfall around Brownsville, still doing it at 4 p.m. They don't last a long time, but they keep on adding to the water surplus here. And if we get some of these bands in the southeast corner to come into Brownsville, east side to Los Fresnos, to Port Isabel, we're going to be talking about that flooding that we mentioned before, 1 to 3 feet of water depth. And that's a problem which would require some flash flood warnings. So don't be surprised if overnight you hear a few flash flood warnings, especially in Cameron, maybe into Willacy, but farther north it becomes much less likely for a flood warning versus an advisory for more nuisance flooding. So you can see the improved circulation in the lower right corner. It's actually there, that little dot of gray, that is actually the center of circulation, now moving a little faster to the north-northwest, soon to be turning north tonight and then quickly to the northeast as we get into Tuesday. Again, dry air west of Interstate 69E and especially Brooks and Hidalgo to the brush country will be difficult to erode. If you've enjoyed this weekend where we had drier air come in, lower temperatures, no heat index issues that we had Saturday and Sunday, and even today, that same dry air scours out some of this rainfall, makes it really hard to push that rain shield west. And we expect that to be the story moving on into Tuesday and Tuesday night as the system moves by. As far as the wind field, we now have an 80 to 90% probability for tropical storm force winds in coastal Cameron County as shown here. The time frame favors squalls from midnight tonight to noon on Tuesday. There's a 50 to 70% probability for tropical storm force winds in coastal Willacy County during the same time. Again, you can see that northeast pull of the winds, which reduces the probabilities as we get farther north along our coastline. And then you get farther west with that northeast movement. the probabilities drop sharply, even west of Interstate 69E, down to 5 to 30 to 40% chances, with those 30 to 40% chances in western Cameron. So it's a very sharp drop off in wind threat, and that's why we only have the tropical storm watches in effect for the coastal areas and not the inland portions of the county. Now that said, a stray rain band could produce a 40-45 mile per hour gust briefly into places like Brownsville, east side of Harlingen. So don't be alarmed by that. Maybe just batten down the hatches on certain things to be on the safe side this evening. For the 58 to 73 mile per hour wind, these are more damaging. This would be what would cause power outages in areas. Now a 40 to 70% probability of these winds from just east of South Padre to 20 to 60 nautical mile portion of the lower Texas Gulf waters. And you can see this little nose here of 70 to 90% in that near 60 nautical mile distance, which is where the hurricane will be as it moves forward into Tuesday morning and late tonight. But notice just a 5 to 20% probability of these winds for coastal Cameron and South Padre, even less in Willacy. But 20% is right on the edge there, and you can see that it wouldn't be surprising if we have a reasonable worst case scenario of getting 60 mile per hour gusts. We could see those power outages in places like Port Isabel and South Padre. The most likely arrival time of tropical storm force winds, this is an easy one. It's tonight, mainly overnight. So we're kind of thinking after 8 p.m., but especially midnight to 2 a.m., midnight to 4 a.m. is when those stronger winds would come in on the more sustained bands that could reach the coastline and sneak a little bit inland to those zones in the coastal locations, such as Port Isabel, East Los Fresnos, Port Mansfield. So we'll see how this goes, but that's your most likely time of arrival. As far as the storm surge or above average tides, this is the 1 to 2.5 feet of inundation above normally dry ground. We could reach close to 3 feet, but we're thinking that higher value will stay on the upper Texas coast. This is for all the areas. We have a coastal flood advisory in effect for all of our coastline, especially the Barrier Island, but the higher tides will be felt at places like docks in Port Isabel and Laguna side of South Padre. As for rainfall, we've already had nearly 3 inches in Brownsville Airport and 1 to 3 inches in places on the east side of Brownsville, such as the port. And the additional heavy rainfall potential remains tight to these areas. You can see the yellow color here is 4 to 6 additional inches, and maybe 2 to 4 inches. That could include Harlingen and Raymondville. We can see the back edge of this green line is the edge of Harlingen and Raymondville. So elsewhere, less than 1 inch is likely. You can see a very sharp cutoff to notable or even measurable rain. Notice that Hidalgo County, much of Kennedy County, and all of the brush country and Rio Grande Plains are 0. And so for Southeast Cameron, we could total 6 to 10 inches. For example, here at Brownsville Airport, but also the Port of Brownsville could see it. Boca Chica Beach could see it. Obviously, South Padre Island could see those kind of rainfall. So in addition to the storm tides coming up at South Padre, basically blocking drainage, we could have 6 to 10 inches of rain there on the ground, and we know how Padre Boulevard drains, not very well. So it would not surprise to see 4 feet of total water on Padre Boulevard tomorrow morning if it rains hard and the drainage can't go out of there. So be aware of that, folks that live in South Padre. Unfortunately, all this great rain for Cameron County and maybe sneaking into Willacy and a little bit of eastern Hidalgo is not good news for our reservoirs. It will not strike them at all. They had a dry weekend, and all the gains we had last week were drops in the bucket. No more drops in the bucket for a while. We're running out of time for Atlantic tropical cyclones out there, and our water crisis situation continues. Moving on to the takeaways to end this webinar. So confidence is now high that the event occurs. We've already got a strong tropical storm, and now we're expecting a hurricane. Confidence is moderate to high regarding those impacts, really focusing on eastern Cameron, especially southeastern Cameron, but we can't rule out locations for some impact along and just east of the highway in Cameron and then east of the highway in Willacy. So here's all your impacts listed here. Strong wind gusts, we mentioned that before on the east side, coastal flooding on the beach and bay side, rainfall flooding likely in poor to very poor drainage urban locations. When you combine that with the heavier rainfall, 1 to 3 feet of water depth likely in the bands. And again, southeast Cameron County, but they can include the east side of Brownsville. So if you're in Brownsville, Rio Hondo, Arroyo City, Los Fresnos east side, and all the way out to Port Isabel and South Padre, those are the areas of most concern. Port Mansfield, maybe. We'll have to see how that goes, but it may pull away in time before Port Mansfield gets it. We could have nuisance flooding in Raymondville and Lyford and Sebastian, but it looks like nuisance only as, again, the heaviest rain will pull eastward rather than move northward. Waterspouts most likely over the Gulf waters, and needless to say, small craft should remain in port, and shippers of larger craft should find a way to stay out of those areas, especially from 20 nautical miles out east. That would include the waters east of Mansfield as well. Kind of avoid that area overnight through tomorrow midday, and then come back in when things get a little bit cleaner, beginning especially late Tuesday night and really more Wednesday into Wednesday night. And with that, our next briefing will be at 10:30 p.m. or 4:30 a.m. tomorrow, meaning tonight or tomorrow by form of email. If conditions get a little bit more dicey, we will webinar tomorrow at 10:30 a.m., and that would be the final webinar. If they remain on track, and we think they will be, we'll just keep going with emails and do interviews as need be, and any conference calls you all wish to have regarding Francine. And with that, I'm going to end the recording.